The man had come to the forest in search of deer, not ghosts. It was July, the air thin and bright over the Gunnison National Forest. When his boots crunched through a stretch of undergrowth he had never wandered before. The trees opened just enough to reveal a hollow, a clearing too quiet for summer. No birdsong, no rustle of chipmunks, only a breathless stillness that made him stop mid-stride. What caught his eye was not movement, but a shape, the collapsed outline of a tent. Its fabric, once blue, was now bleached gray, brittle and torn like parchment left in the sun. The poles jutted at odd angles, half buried under pine needles and rot. He thought it was just the skeleton of an abandoned camp, the kind hunters or drifters leave behind. But the silence around it clung to him, heavy, like the forest itself was holding its breath. He edged closer. The smell reached him first. Faint, acrid, not of earth or pine, but of something sour and gone. He lifted a flap of the tent and stumbled back. Inside lay the remains, not fresh, not whole, but unmistakably human. A jawbone curled upward from a nest of matted fabric. A sun-whitened hand jutted from beneath a sleeping bag. The fingers curled as if still grasping for warmth. His chest tightened. There was more than one. 3 forms tangled together, the outlines collapsed by time, flesh gone to the elements, bones pressing through shredded clothing. Not the scene of sudden violence. No blood, no broken tent. Just the slow, patient work of exposure and starvation. He staggered into the clearing's edge, fumbling for his phone, his mind reeling with questions. Who were they? How long had they been here? Why had no one come for them? The forest gave no answer, only the low hiss of wind through the pines, carrying the echo of lives cut short. When the deputies arrived hours later, they stood in stunned silence. The bones were weathered, brittle with seasons of frost and thaw. Nearby lay remnants of canned food, a propane stove, a notebook too warped to read. A family's final campsite, preserved in the dirt. It would be days before the names surfaced, weeks before the story took shape. But in that first instant, that haunting discovery in the hollow silence of Gunnison, one truth was clear. This was not just death. This was vanishing, a family swallowed whole by wilderness and silence. The question lingered, sharper than any blade. What could drive a mother, her son, and her sister into the forest, away from everything, only to leave them here, forgotten, unburied, hidden until chance revealed them? If you're drawn into mysteries like this, where the ordinary folds into the unthinkable and the wilderness keeps its secrets for far too long, you'll want to stay with the story. Subscribe now, and you won't miss what comes next. Before the woods, before the silence, there was a house at the edge of Colorado Springs, a modest place on a suburban street, where neighbors waved at one another, lawns were mowed, and mailboxes stood like sentinels. Inside, though, the air was different. Rebecca Vance had grown weary of the world pressing at her door. She was 42, a mother, carrying a weight she rarely spoke of. The pandemic years had cracked open something inside her, distrust of society, exhaustion with bills and screens, a gnawing belief that the world outside her walls was no longer safe. Rebecca devoured articles about collapse, about self-sufficiency, about vanishing into the wilderness to start fresh. What began as curiosity hardened into conviction. Her son, just 14, had no real say in the matter. He was bright, lanky, more comfortable behind a computer screen than in the backcountry, but his love for his mother kept him quiet. He trusted her, even when her ideas took strange turns. He followed her lead the way children do, when they don't yet know they can resist. Then there was Christine, Rebecca's younger sister. She had lived most of her life in her sister's shadow, quieter, less certain, but bound by loyalty. When Rebecca began to speak openly about leaving, Christine didn't argue. She nodded, as if to say, "If you go, I'll follow." The plan was not sudden. Rebecca prepared with the quiet diligence of someone convinced she had glimpsed truth others refused to see. Canned food filled boxes in the garage. A propane stove, cheap tarps, hand-me-down blankets. No solar panels, no radios, no maps of the deep forest they chose. Just the bare bones of survival, the kind a catalog might promise but nature would mock. To friends, Rebecca's tone grew sharper. She spoke of decay, of the world collapsing under greed and violence. "It's better to live free," she said once to a neighbor, "than chained to a system that doesn't care if we survive." Most dismissed it as frustration, a phase. Nobody thought she meant it literally. By summer, she had decided they would leave the noise behind. She did not tell many where they were going. Only hints, vague words about the mountains, about starting over. Her voice carried both fear and hope, the brittle hope of someone convinced that survival meant escape. The morning they drove away, the boy watched his neighborhood vanish in the rearview mirror. He didn't wave goodbye. He stared at the houses lined in perfect order, the asphalt shimmering in heat, and wondered how long until they came back. Christine sat in the passenger seat, eyes forward, jaw tight. Rebecca's hands clutched the wheel, as if steering not just the car, but the course of all their futures. No police were called. No alarms were raised. Families vanished quietly all the time, not in the dramatic way of kidnappings, but in the quiet erosion of ties, the unremarked slipping away of those who no longer wished to be seen. For the Van Cess, the road to Gunnison was not marked by sirens or search parties. It was marked by silence. The mountains rose to greet them, green ridges rolling into the horizon. Rebecca looked at them with reverence. Here was the promise she clung to, the forest as sanctuary, the wilderness as freedom. Here, she told herself, they could begin again. What she did not see, what none of them could see, was that they were stepping not into freedom, but into the slow, merciless grip of exposure. If stories of vanishing lives, of fragile decisions that spiral into haunting endings, hold you, then don't step away. Subscribe now and continue down this path. The deeper we go, the darker it becomes. The road narrowed as they climbed. Pines rose taller, their trunks crowding the sky, shadows spilling over the car. The asphalt ended, replaced by gravel that rattled beneath the tires. Soon even that faded, and they were left to dirt tracks winding into the belly of Gunnison National Forest. Rebecca slowed, eyes scanning the trees as if waiting for a sign. The forest was vast, 1.6 million acres of ridges, valleys, and canyons where a person could disappear 1,000 times over. It was the kind of place where silence pressed so close that the rest of the world might as well not exist. She pulled over near a hollow, a spot shielded by a wall of spruce. "This is it," she said. The boy opened his door and stepped out. The air was thin, almost sweet with pine, but heavy in a way that pressed against his chest. He turned in a circle, the forest endless in every direction. No landmarks, no trails. Just green upon green upon green. His stomach tightened. Christine lifted a tarp from the car, her movement stiff. She had said little since they left Colorado Springs, but her silence was not agreement. It was resignation. She looked around, searching for something familiar, a clearing, a break in the trees, a sign they were not as alone as they seemed. There was nothing. The first camp went up clumsily. Rebecca unrolled sleeping bags onto the forest floor and drove tent poles into ground still damp from late snowmelt. The tent sagged at one corner. The boy tried to fix it, but the soil crumbled beneath his hands. His fingers smelled of rot and moss. Food was their comfort. Rebecca unpacked cans of beans, corn, soup. She lit the propane stove and watched the blue flame flicker, her face softening. For that moment, it felt like control. She handed her son a bowl, touched his hair, whispered, "See? We'll be okay." But the forest whispered louder. As night fell, the temperature dropped. The warmth bled away faster than the thin sleeping bags could trap it. The boy shivered, listening to the forest breathe around him. Every creak of a branch sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind rattled the tent until it seemed it would collapse. He buried his face against the thin fabric of his blanket, but the cold slid in anyway. Days blurred quickly. The sun rose late, set early. Firewood was harder to find than they imagined, damp logs hissing and spitting when they tried to burn them. The canned food stacked neatly on a log began to look smaller, finite, fragile. Rebecca still spoke with conviction, her voice edged with steel. "We're learning," she said each morning. "It takes time, but we'll adjust." But Christine's eyes betrayed doubt. She watched her sister's hands tremble when the fire sputtered out. She watched the boy's face grow paler, thinner, his energy fading. Christine had agreed to follow, but each day she wondered if her silence had condemned them. The forest was patient, but it was not forgiving. Hunger lingered at the edges of every meal. Cold seeped into their bones, even under the noon sun. Rebecca's dream had carried them here, but already began to fray. At night, when the wind rose and the trees groaned like an old house, the boy whispered to himself a question he never dared ask his mother aloud. How long before we can go home? The wilderness did not answer. If the story pulls you deeper, if you can feel the chill of Gunnison settling in your own bones, stay with it. Subscribe now. The further they go, the harder it becomes to turn back. By the third week, the Kins no longer look like security. They look like countdown clocks. Each lid Rebecca peeled back fell heavier. Each spoonful scraped from the bottom, a reminder how fast supplies vanish when measured against empty stomachs. At first she told herself they would hunt, that they would fish the streams and forage like the pioneers she had read about. But the rifle she brought was heavy in her hands, and she never fired at once. The boy, too young to aim with precision, trailed behind her with tired eyes. Christine tried to gather wild plants, but the glossy guidebook pages Rebecca had packed were smeared by rain, the ink bleeding until leaves and roots blurred into useless shapes. Every step into the forest brought the question, is this food or poison? Neither sister dared to test the answer. Nights were worse. The cold sank deeper, unrelenting. Their breath hung white inside the sagging tent. Blankets stiffened with frost. The boy coughed in his sleep, a thin wheeze that clawed at Rebecca's chest. She wrapped him tighter, whispering promises that rang hollow in the blackness. Just a little longer. We'll be stronger soon. The forest gave nothing. No berries, no small game, not even drywood that would burn clean. Rain slicked the soil into mud, and when the sun returned it baked the earth until it cracked. Their world shrank to the hollow where they camped, as if the trees had closed in around them, sealing them off from return. Christine watched her sister unravel. The Rebecca she had followed into mountains was confident, defiant, certain of her vision. Now, she caught her staring at the cans, lips pressed thin, calculating. She caught her hands trembling when she tried to strike the lighter against damp kindling. Rebecca would force a smile for the boy, but when his back was turned, her eyes carried something Christine had never seen before, fear. It was unspoken, but they all felt it. The point of no return had passed. The car was too far now, the trails too confusing, the forest too vast. They had gone in deep with no breadcrumb trail to lead them out. Every day they stayed, their strength ebbed further, making the idea of escape not only daunting but impossible. Still, Rebecca clung to her belief, her voice the only weapon left against despair. "We can do this," she repeated, as though words alone could stitch warmth into the night. "The world out there is worse. This is where we belong." But Christine saw the boy's hollow cheeks, the way he rubbed his arms for warmth even in daylight. She felt the forest's patience, its indifference. She knew the wilderness wasn't a sanctuary. It was a slow undoing. And yet none of them left. They stayed in the hollow, waiting for a strength that never returned. If stories like this leave you holding your breath, wondering how fragile hope can crumble in silence, then stay with me. Subscribe now. The path forward only grows darker. The forest had a way of keeping time without clocks. Days blurred into gray sameness, broken only by the gnawing in their stomachs. Hunger was no longer a passing discomfort. It was an ever-present shadow, pressing on ribs, dulling thoughts, fraying patience. The boy felt it first. He moved slower, his steps dragging. His once bright eyes seemed too large for his face now, his skin stretched tight over bones. He tried not to complain. He wanted to be brave for his mother. But sometimes, when he thought she wasn't listening, a whisper slipped out. "I'm so hungry." Rebecca heard every word. Each one cut deeper than the last. She measured out portions with hands that shook. Beans thinned with water. Soup split 3 ways until broth tasted of nothing but desperation. She told herself they could stretch it, that something would change, that a rabbit might stumble into their path, that the forest would finally give. But the cans dwindled and the game never came. Christine grew restless. She walked the woods alone sometimes. Branches claw at her arms as she searched for anything edible. Once she returned with mushrooms, pale and spongy, her palms trembling. She set them before her sister. Rebecca stared at them, then pushed them aside. "We don't know if they're safe." "There's something," Christine snapped, her voice breaking. "We can't just—" Her words cut off under the boy's hollow gaze. Anger crumbled into silence. She brushed the mushrooms away, tears brimming. Nights turned brutal. The cold clawed deeper, their sleeping bags soaked from ground moisture. Firewood refused to catch. They huddled together for warmth, but still they shivered until their teeth chattered. Sleep came only in fragments, broken by the ache of hunger and the groan of trees shifting under wind. Rebecca's conviction frayed. The fire in her voice sputtered, replaced by whispers to herself when she thought no one could hear. "We'll be okay. We'll be okay." The words no longer carried power. They were prayers to silence that never answered. The boy began to ask about home. "Can we go back?" "Just for a little while." His voice was small but steady. Rebecca kissed his forehead and pulled him closer. "This is home," she said, but the lie trembled in her throat. Christine wanted to scream at her sister, to force her to admit what was plain, that they were lost, that the dream was killing them. But fear bound her tongue. Fear of the forest. Fear of leaving alone. Fear of betraying the only family she had left. So they stayed, trapped by belief, by loyalty, by hunger's shadow. The forest gave nothing. The cans grew lighter. And slowly, their bodies began to fail them. If you can feel the weight of that silence, if you can see how quickly hope drains when hunger settles in, you know this story has only begun to tighten its grip. Subscribe now. The descent from here is inevitable. By late summer, the forest no longer felt like trees and sky. It felt like a cage. Each direction looked the same. Each shadow mirrored the next. To the boy, it seemed the world had shrunk to a single hollow of damp earth, brittle canvas, and hunger. His limbs grew heavy, his lips cracked, his cough deepened until it rattled inside his chest. Rebecca tried to hide her alarm. She pressed her palm to his forehead at night, whispered reassurances, and swore he only needed rest. But she felt the truth in his skin, a fever weak and thready. The air itself seemed to weigh on him. Christine watched from the edge of the campfire. She saw Rebecca's hands tremble, saw her whisper prayers into the smoke. "We should go," Christine said one evening, her voice breaking through the silence like a stone through glass. "We can't stay here. He needs a doctor." Rebecca shook her head, sharp and fierce. "If we go back, it was all for nothing. Everything we sacrificed, everything we left behind. This was our chance to be free." "Free?" Christine's voice cracked. "We're starving. He's dying." The boy's cough silenced them both. His frail body curled against the sleeping bag, his breath shallow. Rebecca touched his hair, clinging to him as if sheer will could keep him tethered. Christine turned away, tears burning in her eyes. The forest pressed harder. Nights bled into mornings without warmth. Food was gone but for a few cans. The propane sputtered its last hiss, leaving them to fight with damp kindling that smoked more than it burned. They ate cold beans from dented metal, their fingers stiff from cold. Rebecca began to change. Her voice softened, no longer sharp with conviction, but hollow with pleading. She spoke to the trees sometimes, whispered apologies to no one. Her once steady posture bent beneath the weight of exhaustion. Christine felt her own body weaken, dizziness when she stood, knees buckling on short walks. Hunger made her mind foggy, every thought sluggish. She dreamed of food at night, waking with the taste of ashes in her mouth. By September, the forest showed no mercy. Nights dipped toward freezing, frost glazing the tent. The boy's cough grew quieter, more ragged, until sometimes it vanished altogether, replaced by long stretches of silence that made Rebecca press her ear to his chest in terror. The sisters no longer argued. Words cost too much strength. They moved like shadows, tending to small rituals, gathering damp branches, dividing the last scraps of food, wrapping the boy in every blanket they had. The breaking point came quietly, not in a scream or collapse, but in a look. One evening, Christine met Rebecca's eyes across the dying campfire. No words passed between them, only the shared knowledge of what the forest had already decided. They had come seeking freedom. What they found was a slow surrender. If you felt the ache of this unraveling, the quiet horror of lives slipping away in silence, you know how deep this story cuts. Subscribe now, because what happens next will haunt you. The morning broke gray, the sky low and swollen with cloud. Rebecca stirred awake to the sound of stillness. For weeks she had grown accustomed to Boy's cough, sharp, brittle, echoing through the tent. That morning there was nothing. She reached for him. His body was still, his skin cold in places where warmth should have lingered. She pressed her ear to his chest and waited, breath held for the rise, the faint rhythm of life. It did not come. Her cry split the clearing. It was not a scream of fear, but of something deeper, rawer, a sound dragged from the soul, jagged and unending. Christine rushed to the tent, her knees sinking into mud as she pulled the flap open. One look was enough. She turned away, pressing her fist against her mouth, her stomach heaving. Rebecca clutched her son's body to her chest. She rocked back and forth, whispering his name, her tears soaking into the fabric of his thin blanket. Her arms wrapped around him, as though she could keep him from leaving if she just held tightly enough. Hours passed that way. The forest remained indifferent. Christine sat outside, numb. She stared at the trees, her face streaked with silent tears. Her body screamed for food, for warmth, for escape, but her mind could not move beyond the image of her nephew's hollow face. She wanted to speak, to comfort, but the words withered before they left her lips. When night fell, Rebecca still held him. The cold had grown sharper, a hard edge that sliced through the clearing. Christine urged her to let go, to lay him gently outside the tent. But Rebecca shook her head violently, clutching him tighter. "He's all I had," she whispered. "He's all I had." The days that followed blurred into grief. Rebecca barely moved. Her body wrapped around what remained of her son. Her voice grew hoarse from whispers and prayers, fragment of lullabies that dissolved into sobs. Christine tried to keep the fire alive, tried to coax her sister to eat, but her own strength was failing. The forest seemed to close in tighter. Crows gathered in the trees above, their black eyes watching. The air smelled faintly of rot, of earth disturbed. Christine shooed them away with weak arms, but they always returned. Rebecca's grief was absolute. It hollowed her, stripped away the last of her resolve. She had come to the forest chasing freedom, but now she sat in the dirt, clutching silence, unable to release it. Her dream had ended with a single still body, a truth she could not accept. Christine began to feel the shadow of her own and creeping closer. Her steps faltered, her thoughts slowed. Hunger gnawed at her until she could hardly stand. But worse than the hunger was the despair. Each night she stared into the darkness, listening to her sister's broken whispers, and wondered if the forest had already chosen them both. The first death had come. The others hovered close behind. If you can feel the chill of that silence, the weight of loss pressing down with every breath, then you know how hauntingly fragile life becomes at the edge of survival. Subscribe now. The wilderness isn't finished with them yet. After the boy's death, time ceased to move in days or weeks. It became a blur of gray skies and darker nights, measured not by sunrise, but by the steady decline of the two women left behind. Rebecca clung to her son's body for as long as she could, even as it changed, even as the air grew heavier with the scent of decay. Christine begged her, pleaded through tears, to let him rest. Finally, one evening, when Rebecca's strength gave out and her arms could no longer hold him, Christine lifted what she could, carried him a few paces into the trees, and laid him beneath the pines. She covered him with earth and branches, whispering apologies with every handful. Rebecca watched in silence, her eyes empty, as if something vital had gone with him into the soil. From that night on, Rebecca barely spoke. She sat near the fire pit, though the fire itself was rarely lit anymore, staring at nothing. Her one sharp conviction was gone, replaced by a hollow stare that unnerved Christine more than words ever could. The food was gone now, not dwindling but gone. Their stomachs were empty, their bodies skeletal. Christine tried to chew pine needles, tried to boil bark into bitter water. Anything to fool her body into believing it had been fed. Her lips cracked and bled. Her hands shook constantly. Rebecca refused even that. She drank water when Christine pressed it to her lips, but little else. Her skin grew pale, her cheekbones sharp, her hair tangled and dull. She sat as though waiting for something, for the forest to offer mercy, or for her own body to give out. Illness crept in quietly. Christine's cough grew harsher, rattling deep in her lungs. She wheezed when she moved, each breath an effort. Rebecca's silence grew heavier, her words fewer until entire days passed without her voice. The sisters shared glances across the clearing, both too weak to argue, too weak to even comfort. The forest remained indifferent. Crows circled, landing in the branches above. Squirrels darted at the edges of camp, bold in their thievery now that the humans posed no threat. The wind carved through the hollow with icy precision, stripping away what little warmth remained. At night, Christine dreamed of food, roasted chicken, hot bread, steaming soup. She woke with tears on her cheeks, the hunger clawing at her insides like a living thing. Sometimes she thought she heard voices in the trees, her name whispered low. She would stumble outside the tent, searching, only to find the forest empty. Rebecca dreamed too, but her dreams were of her son, alive, laughing, running ahead through the trees. She called after him, always just a step behind, never able to catch him. Waking was worse than sleeping. Each dawn was a reminder that he was gone, and that she had led him here to die. The sisters began to fade, not just in body, but in spirit. Their voices grew quieter, their movements slower, until silence settled over the hollow like a shroud. They were alive, but only just. It was no longer a question of survival. It was a question of how long the forest would take to finish what had begun. If this descent leaves you breathless, if you can feel the weight of their silence, the inevitability of what comes next, stay with this story. Subscribe now, because the ending is closer than you think. By the time the first true snows came, the sisters were ghosts. Christine could barely stand. Her frame, once lean and strong from years of hiking, had collapsed into frailty. Every step made her knees tremble. Every breath tore at her chest. Her cough echoed through the hollow, louder than the wind, and when she spit into the dirt, blood stained the ground. Rebecca stayed mostly in the tent, curled into the sleeping bag that offered little protection against the creeping cold. She no longer shivered. The cold had settled too deeply in her bones to resist. Her eyes were sunken, her skin sallow. She spoke rarely, and when she did, it was not of survival but of her son. She whispered his name into the canvas walls, as if he might step back into the world as she called softly enough. Their bond, once a thread of hope tying them together, had frayed. Christine tried to keep Rebecca alive, pressing water to her lips, coaxing her to chew a strip of bark, but she could feel her own body failing. Each attempt drained her further. At times she wondered if she should stop, if it was kinder to let the forest decide for both of them. Nights blurred into one another. Time lost meaning. They no longer spoke of rescue, no longer listened for distant hikers or planes. The world outside their hollow had shrunk to nothing more than the sound of their breath, ragged, uneven, fragile. One night, in the depth of December, Christina woke to silence. No coughs, no restless shifting from her sister beside her. She turned her head and saw Rebecca still. Her eyes closed, her lips parted slightly. Christine reached out with trembling fingers and touched her hand. Cold. Rebecca was gone. Christine's cry was weak, a sound that caught in her throat and dissolved into sobs. She clung to her sister's body, as she had clung to her nephew's month before. She begged aloud, her words slurred and broken, but the forest did not answer. The stars wheeled above, cold and unmoved. In the morning, though morning was only a dim light through the trees, Christine dragged herself outside the tent. She sat against a fallen log, her breath ragged, her body too weak to move further. Hunger gnawed at her insides, but she no longer cared. The days that followed were a blurred delirium. She saw shapes moving in the woods, her parents, her sister alive again, her nephew's laughter drifting through the trees. Sometimes she thought she saw smoke in the distance, a sign of fire, of people. She tried to call out, but her voice was gone. Her body failed slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to fight with. One morning, though she could not have said which, Christine did not rise. She leaned against a log, eyes half open to the gray sky, and simply stopped. The clearing fell silent. No more voices, no more movement. Just 3 bodies in the forest, swallowed by time and weather. It would be months before anyone stumbled upon them. Months before the world outside even realized they had been missing. But in that moment, the hollow became a graveyard, and the forest stood witness to the end of a family that had tried and failed to escape it. If the silence of this ending chills you, if you feel the weight of their last breaths, the inevitability of surrender, stay with this story. Subscribe now, because the discovery is still to come. The hollow lay untouched for nearly a year. Winter had stripped the trees bare, snow burying the clearing in white silence. Spring thawed it, rain soaking into the soil, loosening what the cold had stiffened. Summer grew thick again with brush and insects. Life went on in the forest as though nothing had happened. 3 people reduced a memory, their bodies quietly giving themselves back to the earth. It was July when a pair of hikers strayed from the marked trail. They weren't searching for anything, only curious, wandering into the denser pines, following a faint game path downhill. The air was still, the forest unusually hushed. When the first hiker noticed the tattered shape of a tent among the trees, they thought it abandoned gear, left behind by careless campers. But as they drew closer, a sickly smell, faint but unmistakable, drifted through the heat. The tent sagged inward, its fabric shredded by weather and animals. Nearby, a boot lay half buried in pine needles. A few feet beyond, something pale emerged from the soil, the unmistakable curve of bone. The hikers fled, their voices shaking as they called authorities on a weak cell signal. Hours later, park rangers and deputies arrived, pushing carefully into the hollow with gloves and masks. What they found silenced even the most hardened among them. Inside the tent, the remains of 2 women lay side by side, skeletal but unmistakably human. One had collapsed into the other, as if reaching for comfort in her final hours. Just beyond the camp, beneath a shallow covering of branches, were the smaller bones of a child. Scattered around were the remnants of a life cut short, a cracked cooking pot, empty food wrappers, a small Bible with pages warped by rain, clothing stiff with rot. There was no sign of violence, no intruder, no predator responsible. Only hunger, cold, and time. The coroner's report would later confirm what the scene had already whispered. Malnutrition, hypothermia, the long decline of bodies unprepared for the merciless grip of the wilderness. No foul play, no hidden killer. Just 3 lives swallowed by the dream of surviving in a place that offered no mercy. The news rippled outward like shock waves. Headlines carried their names, their faces. Commentators argued about choices and blame. Why they had gone, why no one checked sooner, why the forest had to take them. Some called it a tragedy. Others, a cautionary tale. For the family left behind, it was only grief, sharpened by the knowledge of how long their loved ones had suffered before the end. Yet in the forest, the discovery changed nothing. The pines still swayed in the wind. Birds still nested overhead. The hollow remained as it had been, quiet, remote, indifferent. What lingered was not the crime of murder, but the ache of futility. They had walked into the trees, seeking freedom, seeking peace, perhaps even redemption. What they found instead was silence, and in that silence the end. For those who tell their story now, the lesson is simple, though never easy to accept. The wilderness is beautiful, but it is not gentle. It does not care about dreams or determination or faith. It takes what it will, and it gives nothing back until it chooses to. And on that July afternoon, 2 years after the family first vanished, it finally gave them back. If this ending left you shaken, if you felt the weight of discovery and the echo of silence, stay with us. Subscribe now, because more stories like this wait in the shadows of the wilderness, and each one asks the same haunting question: how far would you go, and what would you risk to escape the world?